Are the people Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is accusing of being leakers actually leakers, or are they whistleblowers? We'll dive in right now. So a whistleblower is a person who has information about an organization, such as a current or former employee, a contractor, an insider who is aware of something that is illegal, unethical, or unsafe within an organization, and they report it to someone who has the ability, an organization or an entity or a person who has the ability to be able to make a correction. This could be managers, regulators, law enforcement, the public. So what generally is reported? Generally fraud, corruption, safety hazards, regulatory violations, environmental harm, abuse of power, maybe discrimination. And who usually does that? Again, current or former employees, contractors, customers, volunteers, anyone who essentially has the knowledge. And who do they usually report? There's two options. They can report internally to hotlines, to compliance hotlines, or they could report externally to government agencies, to nonprofits, to the media. So that's generally what a whistleblower is. And the question of why would someone report that? There are a lot of people who do have high moral standards there. They couldn't live with themselves if they didn't report something like that. Maybe something like that happened to them and they don't want others to experience that. They feel compelled to stop harm for others. They also feel like there might be like an ethical or a moral duty that they have to do that. They want to prevent further damage or loss or harm to others. There's legal incentives. Many statutes offer monetary rewards in which you would share in some of that for exposing fraud or such as Medicaid, Medicare fraud. Again, personal conscience, personal integrity, doing what's right when no one's looking. The U.S. has many legal frameworks and protections in place for whistleblowers because honestly, the consequences of being a whistleblower can be pretty steep. Generally, it's not just the act of what they've exposed, but the retaliation can often be worse than that, such as, being ostracized by others, such as being called a snitch, such as having to endure isolation and abuse and like maybe harsh conditions depending on the employer or organization that you're dealing with. Also, there's the False Claims Act, which allows private citizens to sue on behalf of the government for fraud, again, Medicare, Medicaid fraud, and share in recoveries. There's the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which protects employees of public companies who report accounting or auditing fraud. The Dodd-Frank Act empowers the Security and Exchange Commission, SEC, to pay bounties of 10 to 30% of penalties to whistleblowers exposing securities laws violations. There's also the Occupational Safety and Health Act, the OSHA Act, which forbids retaliation against private sector workers reporting unsafe conditions. And OSHA has definitely helped with some of the unsafe conditions. There's also international protections, common protections against retaliation, such as allowing the whistleblower to be anonymous or have the confidentiality of their identity, which can allow them to continue working if that's something that they need to do if they want to do that. There's also anti-retaliation provisions, which prevent firing, demotion, or pay cuts, and that happens a lot. That would be a grounds like of retaliation, an example of retaliation. Legal remedies, courts can order reinstatement. Sometimes, though, a lot of people don't want the reinstatement, again, given by the fact of the retaliation that they're afraid that they would continue to experience if they went back to work at a particular place. Back pay, compensatory damages, which is damages which compensate them for, loss, like pain, stress, things like that. Also, there are whistleblower support organizations and even potential pro bono legal help there. There's a lot of risks and challenges to being a whistleblower. There's a lot of retaliation, such as harassment, firing, blacklisting, legal threats, especially in the government. If you could imagine, the government is kind of this, you know who you know and things like that. It's a very small kind of pond, I guess you would say. And being blacklisted from something like that would be very difficult to overcome. Again, the emotional stress and the isolation, people who were your friends at one point are no longer your friends. Again, legal battles there, potential criminal or civil liability if disclosures go beyond the protected channels. So it's really important that whistleblowers gather clear, documented evidence of the wrongdoing, that they consult the internal channels, a supervisor, a compliance officer, a hotline, if safe and effective. If internal reporting fails or is unsafe, external outlets, regulators, inspector generals, law firms, watchdog groups, or the press. And also seeking legal advice is very important with someone who's experienced in dealing with that. To understand applicable statutes that apply in the scenario and preserve the rights, and file a formal complaint or disclosure through authorized channels. Famous examples of whistleblowers who have changed things for the better: Daniel Ellsberg for the Pentagon Papers. Sharon Watkins was in the Enron accounting scandal. Bradley Chelsea Manning, Iraq and Afghanistan war logs. Edward Snowden, it's kind of a mixed bag, NSA surveillance. And Frances Haugen, Facebook's internal search research on platform harms. Whistleblowers can play a vital role in uncovering wrongdoing and protecting the public's interest and keeping institutions accountable. Strong legal protections are important to protect them so that we can protect the people that are working in those organizations or have huge parts in the organizations, and keep clear reporting channels are critical so they can move forward without fear of retaliation. Also, the difference between a whistleblower and a leaker is whistleblowing is legal and protected by the laws, but leaking is illegal and lacks protection. So to call someone who is a whistleblower a leaker is disingenuous and untrue. My previous video that I did yesterday talked about how the Secretary of Defense had tried to label 3 individuals who had been let go, anonymously had people from his staff try to report them as leakers. Instead, there's some thought that they may actually be whistleblowers rather than leakers. And so also, you look at who's disclosed. Leakers actually do what Mr. Hegseth has done, as I mentioned in his second Signalgate scandal, in which he allowed his wife and his brother and his attorney, his personal attorney, to have undisclosed information he knowingly gave to them, which is not legal. And as I mentioned in my previous video, essentially it has been prosecuted previously. There is no precedent or no excuse for him to be doing things like that when he knowingly has been divulging information to people who do not have the security clearance to have seen that. The first case, he's indicating that it was an inadvertent accident. This is a particular case where he knowingly shared it with people that he knew that he wasn't supposed to share it with. Additionally, whistleblowers are protected under certain acts, which I mentioned above. And there's really no difference between a person who is a leaker and a person who is a whistleblower. A whistleblower is protected, and a whistleblower is doing something for the common good. A leaker is doing things that can very easily, especially when we're talking about Department of Defense secrets and military plans and war plans and things that are meant to be classified, has no grounds or reason to disclose those things, especially for people who could harm us and our country. And so I think that that is a very serious violation, and something that definitely needs to be considered and needs to be explored even further, and potential consequences need to be doled out if necessary. So again, that is the difference between a whistleblower and a leaker. So hope you have a good rest of your day, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.